Hey everybody, and welcome to my recording studio where I'm going to drop a new track. This time I'm going to show you how to make a Pringles can from beginning to end, and I want to try a new format of tutorial where the project that I'm making, in this case the Pringles can, I haven't prepped for it before. I'm going to do it live. I don't expect it to take too much longer, but this way it's more natural and I don't need to prep for anything, and you get to actually see the full process of how I would make this. So exciting stuff. I was watching some Clinton Jones live streams, if you're thinking why the change. And he does a great job. So, I mean, he's live streaming his, but whatever. So we're going to be making a Pringles can. And in preparation for this, all I really did is I took a bunch of photos because, as you can imagine, this is just basically a fancy cylinder, so the modeling's no big deal. But the texturing is what makes this thing a Pringles can and not any other kind of cylinder, like a coffee can or a bean can or even like a pole outside. So I basically sat this thing down. I took a picture. I rotated it like 60 degrees-ish, took another, and hopefully I got enough coverage to texture this thing fully. So we're going to talk about, I got to make sure this thing's recording, otherwise I'm going to be in big trouble. We are going to be talking about how to do the texturing process and then how to like integrate this with procedural materials and textures and all this. Either way, that's enough build up. Let's open up Blender and get this thing cooking. Okay, here we go. Blender opening. Beautiful. And I do think that this off-the-cuff format's going to be a good thing for everybody, for me, for your local neighbor, for everybody. So to start off, I'm just going to, make a cylinder, since essentially that's the majority of the modeling we need to do. I'm going to make this thing, like, I don't know, the more vertices, the better, but also the slower things are going to be. So I think 60 vertices are fine. I'm actually going to delete the top and bottom because to start with, all I'm going to be really doing is texturing kind of the side of this can, like the part that wraps around, and then we'll do the top and bottom, the lid and the metal base procedurally and all this. I feel like I'm using the word procedurally a bit liberally. Okay, so we have this. Now what I do in this process, and by the way, what I'm about to show you works with any model, but technically any cylindrical model, is I'm going to open up in our camera view one of these reference images that I took. So I go to the Pringles can, and we can make either the red or the green one. I'm going to make the red one because I feel like that's more kind of like the face of the Pringles brand. Nobody likes sour cream and onion. That's probably a hostile statement. Controversial. You're going to see that this image that I took is super stretched. The reason for this is I actually took one by one, like Instagram style aspect ratio images. So what's happening is it has to stretch to fill the bounds of this. One way to fix this, and I wouldn't recommend this for what we're going to do, is you could like change the mode to like fit, and that'll make it look like that. Instead, I'm just going to change the project resolution temporarily. This is only for the texturing process, to anything that's 1 by 1. So you could have picked 1,000 by 1,000, 2,000 by 2,000. It doesn't matter, okay? The reason I do this is so that the image fits in here nicely. And now what I can do is I'm going to make this thing a bit taller. We're trying to match the reference. Is I'm going to keep this thing centered, about the origin. And I'm going to move the camera so it looks like this model is like overlapping with it. And we're going to do a bunch of fancy project from view that's more complicated than it is the idea. So with the camera to view, this makes it so that when I move the viewport, it actually moves the camera with it. And I'm just going to vaguely line this up. Ideally, I don't know if this one has the information, but ideally, if you do have like the focal length information, so you'd go into the details, you do want to put that in. So in my case, 24 millimeters is what I took these photos in, allegedly. So if this isn't matched already, it is not. Make sure that it's using the same focal length. It'll make it easier to match. Although in this case, it does look kind of insane. I think my camera does use a 1.6 crop factor. So I'm just going to multiply it by that. But it doesn't necessarily need to be the same focal length. It just helps. And also, if you have this issue where like zooming in kind of like snaps too far, you could just scale the camera about the 3D cursor, and that will give you more control. And we can like translate the camera. Perfect. Now I'm going to take my cylinder, which is clearly too tall, and move this thing down until it's roughly the right height. There we go. And I am seeing that the curvature of this seems to be a bit too big. I don't know if it's giving me an incorrect focal length or something. We could try returning to 50 and see if this like fits better. Yeah, it does seem to fit better. Really what matters is that your model fits to the image more so than being physically accurate to the camera focal length dimensions. So this is a pretty good job. We're actually going to hone this in a bit more in the UV projection process, but as long as it's like roughly fitting in, that's a good thing. Okay, so what am I going to do now? I'm going to go to UV editing, and this is where we are going to project the texture, at least one segment of it, rotate the cylinder, do another strip, etc. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save this project so I don't lose my valuable progress. I'm going to call this Pringles for Patreon, because I have a Patreon, and if you want the original images and you don't want to take them yourself, it's available there for a very affordable price. But let's continue. I'm going to make 2 UV maps. One of them is going to be the original UV map. That's going to be our like standard projection, what we have here. So I'm actually just going to optimize this a bit more, so it's taking up more of the UV space. This is just the UV unwrap that comes naturally or automatically for cylinders. The nice thing about them is that they're already fitted, so that if I was to add some kind of procedural whatever, like a checkerboard, I'm going to add that in here, and I'm going to make sure that this is using our UV coordinates. You can see that they wrap around super nicely. They don't have any weirdness going on. So I'm going to keep that coordinate system. That's our original coordinate system. And the second coordinate system is going to be proj, which is short for projection. This is the one we're going to be messing with. We always got to keep our original. So with the projection from the camera view, you take all of this and then you and project from view. So this is going to give you the unwrap of the perspective of how we're looking from the camera view. So original, projection. And just to make sure it's overlapping, let's load in our image. And you can see it's roughly matching up at least as well as we did in the 3D viewport. But kind of the big advantage here is now we can do just a second round of correction, right? So I can like lift this up here. I can select this area, do a bit of proportional editing so it doesn't just move those vertices, but anything within a certain proximity. I'm just going to match these roughly. Like with most things, the better you do this process, the more things are going to end up lining up later down the line. So it's not like a big deal, it's just the quality of your model, right? Just line this up, make sure that there's nothing like outside the bounds of the Pringles can. Like I don't want to be projecting this Rubik's Cube and the table and all this stuff. By the way, let's bump up that engagement, so leave a comment below. Do you like this format? But really, just comment anything. Engagement is good. So there we go. Ideally, you do want to keep its cylindrical shape, but I did an okay job at that. So let me get out of this so I can go to full screen mode. Now we have our 2 UV unwraps, our fitted projection map, and our original map. And what I'm going to do now is start the process of the projection. So here's how we do it. Go to texture paint. This is to paint an image or a material or whatever on our object. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to single image because I just want to paint onto a single texture, and I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to call this like Pringles. You could call it the diffuse or really the wrapping area. So I'm going to call it Pringles wrap or something like that. How disgusting would that be if it was a sandwich? Yuck. And I'm just going to make it a 2K image. So we're creating a new image that we're going to write onto. It's going to be called this. It's 2K. Let's click OK. Okay. So we've done it. It's a blank image. We could like draw on it, and you can see it fills in over here on our original unwrap. Of course, first of all, we want to do the projection, and second of all, you want to make sure this is set to original. If it's set to projection, it's going to paint, but on our projection map, which is not actually what we want. So click original. I'm going to go to cloning because we want to clone paint, but we don't want to do that thing where you clone black onto more black. It makes no sense. Instead, we're going to do clone from paint slot. So this is a special kind of the clone brush, right? So what this lets you do is it lets you clone not from itself to itself, but from a different UV map and a different image. So you'll see what I mean in a second. So I'm going to paint from the projection, the one that's fitted onto this. So even though the model isn't fitted onto the viewport, we know our UV unwrap is, and we are going to use the first red image. So effectively, I guess it's easier to just show you what I mean. It will paint on like this. and it's going to be as accurate as our UV map is, the projection map. So again, it's painting from the camera perspective because that's what our projection thing is, using this image onto the original. So we get this nice flatness thing. And you're going to see as we go across more and more of the cylinder, it's going to kind of fill out this square. So that's how you do it. Just small detail, I'm going to add in a subdivision surface before I do this, set to simple. And the reason I'm doing this is I want more geometry, kind of like loop cuts like this, but I don't want to actually add them in because that would make a lot more work for our UV projection next time, right? Because then we have more vertices to move. This is just a nice way to add in a bit of geometry. And if you didn't know, Blender and I think every program that has like projection, it has this issue where it needs a lot of geometry to do the projection properly. Otherwise, you're going to get some minimal distortion. It looked fine, but if you look at the text, it's not going to be in a straight line, is the issue. So you want to make sure that everything looks the way it does in the original. So I'm just going to add in a subsurf, which adds in geometry, but doesn't give us any extra work. Okay. Okay, back to texture paint mode. Again, our new image, original clone from paint slot with the projection. Let's paint this thing. So boop. Just paint it on everywhere. You don't need to really be precise about it because the precision comes from before. And by the way, all the information we can paint on here is what we had from the image, right? So if we want to paint behind this, it will look like the rays just shot through the rays just shot through the camera through this part of the object and now landed here. So what I mean is this face is going to be on both sides, even though there's supposed to be a label, a nutrition label. So it's just kind of projecting through the mesh, which is why we're gonna, use a new image for this. So we have this. Let's do a shade smooth on this. So shade smooth. Wow, that really does not want to be shade smoothed. Oh well. One thing you're gonna notice, other than that weirdness, is that right now, if we were to go to like rendered view or whatever, it just kind of looks like a white or gray rectangle. The reason for this is because even though we did this texture painting and it's available here, that's only visible because we're in texture paint mode. If we actually go to the material, it just has BSDF. So what we need to do is actually import in this image texture that we made. So the Pringles wrap, not red one, but the Pringles wrap, you connect it and you can see now our progress is visible. And by the way, Blender is weird about image textures and things that you make. You always want to save it. So before we continue, I'm just going to save this. So Alt-Shift-S is a save, or you could just go to Image, Save As, Alt-Shift-S. And then the Pringles thing, we're just going to save our Pringles wrap. So all our progress is going to be written onto there. Cool. Progress has been made. Okay. Next thing we want to do, other than to try to solve this weird shade smooth issue, I don't know why it doesn't want to be shade smooth. Like I can go to flat, smooth, whatever. Other than that, what we need to do is now rotate this to the next section. So at this point, I'm going to start speeding up more and more as we do more images, but I just want to show you the full process. So let's go to look dev so that we don't have any shading. I'm going to go to the camera. And now this time, instead of the first image, we're going to load in red 2. And this is the version that I rotated a bit. You can see if we were to actually move the model, it's like a different perspective on this. And I think what we want to do, I think we rotated it clockwise, so I'm going to rotate this clockwise. We want to match this to the image. Of course, we can't see the image, so I'm going to go to the camera, put this in the front so it's overlapping with like 50% transparency, okay? So you take this, and you could either move the camera to kind of go to the other perspective of the cylinder, or what's easier is we just rotate this. So I'm just going to rotate it until it's lining up. So you want to make sure when you take your photos, you get good coverage. So you get overlap with every previous image. And also, I'm going to do camera to view. We need to move this thing a bit so it fits our cylinder. And it looks like we need to move our camera closer. So there we go. We have our base thing. I'm just going to rotate it along the z-axis a bit more till it matches. Now, ideally, you get this to be like a perfect overlapping. If you don't, it's not a big deal. Oh, by the way, I think we rotated it the wrong way. There are going to be seams, but we can do some normal clone painting to fix that later. So you want to make sure you're rotating this in the correct direction as well. So you can see if we were to paint, whoops, that wasn't my smartest idea. Let's scale this back down. All part of the day of the life. Make sure to disable this so when you do this, it doesn't mess up your camera view. You're going to see if we were to like kind of repaint on this, the P will like be in the incorrect position because we didn't do a perfect match. Again, we're going to be able to handle this ourselves, so it's not a big deal. But okay, so we've basically rotated this so now matches the second image, and now let's repeat the process. So again, UV editing, we keep our original unwrap. It's the projection we want to change. For the projection, do a new U project from view. So it's going to update this. And now we want to reference red 2 to see if it matches it. And you can see, again, we don't have extra geometry from the subdivision surface. It just exists there in the background. So just like last time, we want to fit this. I'm going to select all of these. I'm just going to move them into, I'm just going to move them into position. And we could scale them a bit since they seem to be going out of bounds of the Pringles can. And you want to make sure this kind of matches the curvature the best you can. I'm just going to select these and bring down our proportional editing. Okay, that looks good at the top. Now let's look at the base. I don't know if there is a feature, but if there isn't, I wish there was a feature to change the transparency of this overlay on top of the image, just so I can see what I'm doing a bit better. But it's no biggie. I don't need to cry about it. I just do wish it was there. Okay, I'm changing my proportional editing brush size every once in a while so I can control which set of vertices I'm interacting with. Okay, that looks pretty good. Cool. So now we have our second projection set up. So again, original is still going to be the same as the first, but the projection is now fitted to the second image, and not the first red image, right? But the second one. So now what we do is we go to texture paint. Again, we want to make sure this is set to original. That's very important. We're going to be writing on our Pringles wrap image, clone from paint slot, but this time projection has been updated. We want to paint from red 2. So we used our second image and we updated our projection map, so you update these settings. So now if we were to paint this like sloppily, you could just kind of like paint this on top, and you can see kind of like loosely matches. Of course, the P is a bit incorrect, but they do match up. So what I would recommend is anything that's like a black area, we're just going to paint on because that's information we didn't have before. So we're just going to add that and see how far around the can we can make it before we get this stretching. And then as we get close to the boundary, you could kind of like transition between the two. But in this case, I think just the original transition looked pretty good. Okay, so now we have more of the Pringles can created, and you can see we've essentially filled in more of this. So now we're just going to repeat the process. And I don't think we need to save this image again. I think it should start overriding at this point. So again, let's repeat the process. Camera, and now it's going to get interesting. I think we're going to get to the nutrition label and stuff like that. Now we are going to go to red 3. So now we are like centered on that second face that started to appear. So again, now we know which way to rotate it and everything. We take our model, we rotate it in the correct orientation, which I believe we decided is this one. Is that correct? Yes, it is correct. Rotate it until it's like kind of matching with the letters and the details that we care about. So something like this. And then let's move our camera so it's actually fitting in a bit better. And you could do some rotation, like you're noticing that the top isn't fitting here very well. You could do some rotation of the camera. Or I seem to move the can. It doesn't really matter. You could do either or. Maybe moving the can's easier in this case. You could rotate the can to make our lives easier. There we go. But then if you move the can, you do want to make sure from now on when you rotate it, you're using the local axis so that it's orbiting around its local z-axis, which seems to not be too accurate, but whatever. Good enough. So I'm just going to match this to the original, and that seems to be pretty good. Okay, again, we're going to be overriding some of this, and we're going to do the UV projection to clean this up. So UV editing, you know the drill. Change the projection map. Project from view, load in image 3, and now let's fit this to the image a bit better. So I'm first going to make sure the height's pretty good, and then I'm going to adjust the corners with a bit more proportional editing here, making sure that nothing within my abilities out of bounds. And the nice thing is, even though there's a lot of geometry, like a big ring around here, we don't really care about those faces in the back, right? The ones that are like behind the camera. We don't care about those. So really, we only have to mess with half of this. And let's bring that up. Again, you don't need to do a perfect job because your brain kind of wants to make it work, but when you see it. But if there's too big of seams because you didn't do it properly, it is going to be visible. So just do an okay job, not too much pressure or anything. Just the quality of your model at stake. Okay, there. Let's make that a bit bigger, so it's moving more of the geometry. Okay, I think that's pretty good. In fact, you know, we cleaned it up quite a bit. Let's move on. Texture paint. Make sure this is set to original. Every time it's going to do this because we selected the projection in the UV editing workspace, so it updates it here. It's going to do it every time, so don't forget. Otherwise, you have to go back a couple steps. Update the image. And now, I like to do this from this viewport. Now we're going to paint over this area. We can even paint over some of the things we've already painted. So like this whole chip I'm going to redo. And you can see it kind of changes position because we don't have the exact same alignment. One thing you do want to avoid if you can is like text. It becomes very obvious if you overwrite it. So you want to pick clean transition points where you're not going to notice the seam. So I'm just going to paint here. And then very obviously, anything that's new at this transition point, we're just going to overwrite. Now, one thing you're going to slightly notice is when I did this chip, I overrid it. You can see that the lighting is a bit brighter, and that's because when I take a new photo, and this is now facing the camera, the lighting kind of changes every single time because the shadows are always going to be like tangent to this. So ideally, if you have a soft box, you could put this inside a white soft box where light is even and uniform. You're not going to have this issue. But if you want to kind of finagle this to transition it a bit better, take the strength, bring it down to 0.5. So now we're going to be doing this both 50% strength, and now you can do a bit of a transition here between the harsh edges. But you don't want to get so close that it starts using the text, as you just saw. But this will just make a bit of a fall off. That's kind of useful. So I do recommend doing this. It will help trick the eye into seeing this as something that's correct. Okay, so we've almost done, I don't know, like 75% of this, only an image or two left. We need the nutrition label and all this. Let's bring it on home, and then we're not done. Then we've just done the hard part, the texturing. We still need to make this metal rim. Technically, the inside's a different thing. How do we do that if, you know, the faces have the same texture inside and outside? We'll talk about it. But for now, let's wrap this up. Last image, camera. Last image, maybe one or two more. But now we're on red 4, so now we can actually see the nutrition label. Again, this time I guess I'm going to keep the camera stationary since it really doesn't matter. I'm going to rotate this about its local axis until the nutrition label starts lining up. Scale it down so it fits. And again, we just do the best we can, but do the final adjustments in UV editing. But what really matters here is the rotation. That's the most important thing to get right. Okay, so I think that line is nice and sharp. UV editing, projection, update it, and make sure we have the image so we can see if it's actually lining up. Let's do our adjustment. I think at some point, theoretically, if I can get live streaming to work with our Wi-Fi here, because we have a couple people using it, I have roommates and stuff like that, I would like to do it live if possible, not only because, you know, there's no reason not to, right? Like, there's nothing that was done here that couldn't have been done live. But it's like easier to kind of like upload the video once you've done it. It's already like been encoded on YouTube and all this. And I'm sure people would like to see it live. And I could respond to comments and put the chat in the corner. Ideally, I would like to be able to do that. Can't guarantee anything though. But I like the theory of it. And again, I've been watching those Clinton Jones live streams, which is why I'm like hooked on the idea. Although he uses Cinema 4D, which I actually used for a while. If people didn't know, I came from Cinema 4D. When I was young, I saw those Minecraft animations, those music videos, and I'm like, oh yes, this is what I'm going to be doing. And Cinema 4D seemed like the obvious choice since that's what the tutorials were on. What were we talking about? Texture paint, again, original. Projection, red 4. But yeah, it's funny that I actually ended up starting with, make sure the strength is up there now. Actually ended up starting with Cinema 4D before Blender. But also coincidentally, I remembered like a year ago, technically I took a class in high school about 3D modeling and all this. And in retrospect, we did use Blender version 2.78 or 9 at the time. So I didn't even know I was using Blender at the time. I didn't know that this would become like a thing I'd be using every single day. So that's kind of funny. It's just this thing that like reappeared later in my life, and I didn't like really realize it until I really sat and like remembered it, you know? Again, lighting transition a bit harsh here. Let's bring that strength down and do a bit of a fade. And also, once we're done with this, we're going to do some like BSDF stuff. So we're going to get like additional lighting written on top of this. So it's going to be even harder to tell the transition points, but whatever. Okay, so now we are on the last image. Technically, I think we have enough information from the previous images to kind of complete this, but we want an image that's like facing it because that gives us the highest resolution because there's no curvature in that. So let's do it. And then I think we're going to do the metal rim and maybe the lid. I don't know if it really matters, but it would be interesting to do that. So let's potentially do that. Red 5. Oh, I took 6 images. This one was excess. This is like going back on the start and taking another. There's no point in that one. Seems like 5 images is plenty. So keep that in mind when you take your images. You don't need like literally redundancy, although it does help. And again, these images will be available on the Patreon. So this one's going to be a bit hard to line up because there's so much distortion going on here, but I'm just going to do my best. Something like this. I'm going to line up the letters of like the word nutrition. So you can see the T and the T are kind of lined up. Of course, one's on top of the other. But that's just because usually we do our scaling from project from view. By the way, the nice thing about this process is it's super forgiving. You can totally like scale only on the Z-axis. You can literally reshape this thing as you're making it because we're really only dealing with UV maps that are invariant to this. They don't care about what our mesh looks like. They're already set in stone. So this process is fairly forgiving. And it does help in the lining up. Okay, this one's going to be a bit hard to get the thing looking correct, but whatever. In fact, you can see our S from the Pringles is like all the way over here, where in the original it's here, but if we do that, the nutrition label moves a lot. So this is where the compromises come in. Now, technically, if we pick the correct focal length, I think that's what prevents this issue. Because then you don't round back more than what the point is. Pick the correct focal length if you can. In this case, it doesn't matter too much. UV editing, projection, project from view, new image, and let's line it up. Now, I'm assuming I'm still going to upload this in one part, even though it's probably super long. But maybe I'll upload it in 2 parts. Maybe that's a little bonus. I get 2 videos out of it. Okay, boom. Now let's do those tiny adjustments. There we go. There we go. Now let's line it up on the bottom. Are these moving the top ones? No. So just fit this here. There we go. There we go. I think that's clean enough. Let's bring it on home, boys. Texture paint. Original. Image 5. And now we got to be pretty careful because you can see whatever we overwrite. Let's bring full strength. Whatever we overwrite, it's not lining up too much, so we got to take advantage of this blank red space. So what I'm thinking is clearly we're going to do it over here. So this part doesn't line up too bad. This part's pretty okay. So this part I'm concerned about. So this is where we might need to go back and do some clone painting instead of the clone from paint slots, so the original kind of clone painting. So let's just see what we get out of this. Okay, so far not too bad. This is the area we're going to have to overwrite, but whatever. Let's do it like this. This is part of the process, you know. I do want to get those tiny details on the top. Like I have some of the chipping and stuff like this, because, you know, you open it and close it, and it takes some of the cardboard with it. So you just want to kind of mix and match. Of course, nobody's really going to be coming in here and like reading these details. So as long as you kind of sell it, like from far away, you can't really tell. It's really the shading that matters. Okay. And it really depends. Like, do you want this to be a hero shot? Is this going to be something that's super close to the camera or not really, you know? So I'm just going to say, you know, sect is not a word, but nobody's going to notice. Now, if you want to be super accurate, take a bunch of images, not just 6, and then you could just rotate it by 10 degrees and get no kind of like matching issues. Okay. I think this is a pretty good start. So far, we've gone completely across this. We've created a texture that's flattened out. If you were to like to cut the Pringles can and like flatten it out, this is what it would look like. But now we just need to fix some of these areas, some of these artifacts. To do this, we are going to keep it on clone, but we're going to turn off clone from paint slot. So now it's not using that theory from before. Now the clone brush works a bit differently. I think you control or alt click. Let's see. So control click, and then yeah, I think it's control click. Or is that alt? I think that's control. So you control click. Now it's going to sample from here, and we can use that to paint over. Now we're lucky in that this area of the can's just kind of red, so it will just look fine. Technically, I think these stars are an artifact. You could decide whether or not to keep them, and also in this process, you could do the strength idea. So I'm going to make these faint instead is a thing you can do. And you can also try to get rid of some of these natural highlights since cardboard is a tiny bit reflective. Contrary to popular belief, you can literally paint out the lighting. Just do an okay job with it. It doesn't matter too much. And okay, now we have the Pringles texture all the way around. This is what it looks like without any of the lighting stuff. Kind of like without any BSDF stuff. It looks pretty good. Again, you can kind of see the seams of the transition points. Again, I really wish I could get this thing. Comment below if you know why I can't get this thing to look shade smooth. Is it because of this subsurf? I think it was. But you can see now that we're done with this process, I removed it. It was no biggie. Okay, so the point is you can also remove some of these lighting artifacts if you wanted to by doing this clone brush. So you can see here's an obvious transition point. You control click to sample, 50% strength, and this will just like help blend it a bit better. Although in this case, maybe we even go softer and go from both sides. Up to you. But in general, I think this is pretty good. And when this thing's in motion and doing whatever this can's supposed to do, it's going to hide a lot of that. But I'm just going to go over some of these obvious seams just to clean this up a bit. And you don't want to do this in like a straight line. You do want to be a bit patchy with it because that helps hide the transition line a bit. Yeah, this part needs some retouching. And there's a bit of cloning going on with this platform from here. And on this text, actually. Let's go full strength. Full force. And again, this workflow, any cylinder, but also more specifically any model that you take pictures of. It's just more obvious how to do it with a cylinder or a sphere or something like that. Okay, at this point, you could kind of go through this and make it as accurate as you can. But I think I'm happy with this. So just in case, I'm gonna save this again. I'm gonna overwrite it. So Alt-Shift-S, Pringles wrap, save as image, and in our material, you can just kind of reload this thing from the actual thing. Here it is, Pringles wrap. And there we go. We could do whatever we want with this. We can now like use this information to create some like bump mapping. So you could do this and now it's like a normal map. You could do whatever you want with it, okay? But we have this. Now what we want to do, since we kind of fitted this to the camera, we want to make sure this is the correct aspect ratio three-dimensionally. Because in reality, it kind of looks like a bigger can, right? So I'm going to scale it up on the z-axis. So scale, z-axis, there we go. And by the way, I think the reason that local rotation wasn't working before is because we were on 3D cursor. If you have it on median point, then it doesn't matter too much. Speaking of which, let's center this. Center its rotation to something that makes more sense. And there you go. Now we have this thing nice and centered, and I'm just going to scale it up until it looks right. Okay, so now we have this. It still needs some work. It needs to look different on the inside versus the outside, but more so, I want to talk about, like, we need to make this metal rim and the base on the bottom, so let's do that. So let's actually rename this thing. It's about time, and we don't need this light. To make the base, and we want it to be like a different material, we want it to be metallic. First of all, let me give this thing a different name. We're going to call this like the wrapping. Not just any wrapping, the wrapping for patrons. Link in the description. We have that. I want to give the second part a different material. So what I'm thinking is, we could just kind of model this by eye. So I'm just going to take this F to fill. It's going to try to take texture from what we've done before and use its UV unwrapping to kind of fill in the texture here. Don't worry about it. We're going to overwrite it with something that looks a bit different. We also want to give this thing a tiny bit of a lip. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to extrude it on the Z-axis. And I don't think this should mess with anything up top. It wouldn't make sense if it did. So just like that, bit of a lip, inset it, and then on the inset, it goes back up. So you can imagine this thing now has a tiny metal lip. And just to make that thing more obvious, I'm going to add in a second material. We can call this one metal, since that's what it's going to be. And a quick way to select this, by the way, all the faces that we care about, you select the middle one and then Control spacebar on the number pad increases your selection, kind of like a growth. It looks at its neighbors. This one we are going to assign the metal material to. So you can see whatever we do with this metal material, it's going to show up here. Although one thing I am noticing is because we did this extruding, let's see, if I was to hide all these faces, yeah, okay, that does look correct. I think it's doing some weird shading because it's on the bottom and shade smooth. To fix that, I'm just going to turn our normals to auto smooth. There we go. Okay, so that's going to be metallic, and we can like adjust like the height of that and stuff. But now let's do the top lip as well. And this one's a bit different because it doesn't have like a base. It's kind of open because you have to reach your hand into it, which makes sense. So we're going to do a kind of similar process. I'm going to extrude this up on the Z-axis. And I'm thinking we could literally make this thing a lip. So we're going to select around here. We are going to extrude, but not in any certain direction, because you can see this happens. Instead, we're going to extrude along normals. This will go like normal, is the word, to the surface. So something like that. I'm just looking at my reference can in real life, just to make sure that it looks correct. Yes. And we could even, like technically you could connect these two. I think that would be correct, so let's just do it. You take both of these, and to connect them, you can't just hit F for fill or grid fill. I think what you need to do is you need to do bridge loop. And that will connect those two loops with a bridge. Okay. A bit of smoothing. I'm going to take this, this, and this. So that's Shift-Alt-Click. So just these little loops. I'm going to bevel them with Control-B. I guess the more geometry, the better. I don't really care about the face count. Cool. And then now let's select these and apply our metal material. So Control Spacebar to grow the selection. And we also want this one, this one, this one, and this one. And for the material, assign that to the metal. Okay, and we could always modify that later. So now we have our metal. Of course, it doesn't look like metal. We'll get around to that. But second thing I want to do before we make this thing, look like metal and all this, I want the interior to look different from the exterior. So let me put this on the full screen so we can actually see what's going on here. The interior, I think, is also the same kind of metal. I think the only metal that's super shiny is this one on the bottom, super reflective. But the rest of this is somewhere in between cardboard and metal. It's hard to tell. So that's the material we are going to give it. Just got to make sure it's not on the full screen when I exit, just to make sure. Okay, so somehow we need, what we could do is we could extrude the main part of this. By the way, you click L, or no, that selects everything. You just do a loop select. You could like extrude this, using the extrude along normals thing. So it has like an interior and an exterior, and we could give it different materials. I'm just going to show you a shading trick that does this. So again, we're going to go to this one, the first material slot, the one that has the texture we created. And what I'm going to use is something called back facing. Let's see what it looks like. So it's in the geometry node. What back facing is, it's kind of hard to tell what I'm looking at, but these faces, maybe it's easier to show you on like a plane. So the issue with a material on a single face is if I was to change the color, it's on the top and bottom, right? Because there's no distinguishing thing between them. Back facing, what it does is it says it separates one side from another, white and black. Somehow they look different, even though they're on the same face. Really, it's kind of like a shading trick. It looks at the view angle and changes it. So really, this is transitioning. It's not actually two colors. But the idea is if you use this as the factor of like a mix RGB, one of these is red, one of these is blue, connect that, you're going to see we get the illusion at least that we have two different faces. So this isn't like a texture map or anything that you could like make. It uses this shading like trick from Blender. So if you wanted to import this into a different program, you'd have to use back facing there. What's the point? The point is I'm going to use this back facing from the geometry node, and we're going to mix RGB just like I did before. So mix RGB, back facing is the factor, and there you go. So now you can see we have this on the interior, and on the exterior, we could control this and like make it whatever. In fact, we're going to do the same idea, just a bit different. Instead of doing back facing to mix RGB, I'm actually going to mix shader. And you could use it to mix two shaders together. It's super powerful. So I'm going to have our, shader, the standard one. And then for the interior, I'm going to have a different BSDF that we can control. Just so that it's not like a plain color. Like when we go to rendered view, there's actually shading here, which would look even better in cycles. By the way, I've started messing around with LuxCore. Not too much, but I have it installed. So now this thing has an interior and an exterior. And just to make this thing, better lit, let's use an environment texture since we don't have any actual lighting. And I'm just going to set up an HDRI that I don't want to be visible. So now we can actually see into the interior of this thing. Let's make the metal material look like metal. So material slot 2, make it metallic. So again, this is just to show you where it's selected. I'm going to click select. So this will show the faces that are supposed to be metal. I want it to be, I don't know what it's technically made of. I'm just going to make it metallic. So you can see now it's starting to reflect. You can also bring down the roughness, although if you do it too much, it will look like a mirror. It is pretty rough, somewhere like 0.4, so it's pretty reflective. However, you can't literally, it's not like a mirror. Also with the original thing, I want to bring up the roughness on this image texture, because it's really, no, it is reflective, to be honest. I'll keep it as is. Okay, fine. The metal material, I want to adjust the color. It's kind of like a darker gray, something like that. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And what we could do is, because the bottom's super, super reflective, and does it have some introscopy? I don't think so. By the way, what I'm talking about is this slider. It's kind of like the bottom of a pan effect, that weird like pinching in the reflection. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make yet another material. There's no reason you can't make as many materials as you want. I'm going to clone the metal one. So this is going to be metal shiny. In this version, I only want on the bottom face. So assign. So now whatever we do here will only affect the bottom face. This one I want to be super shiny. So 0.2. How low do I need to go to make this thing like actually show? I guess like 0.25 is what I want. It's not showing too much because of the HDRI we picked. But if we rotate it here, you can see now it's reflecting whatever is in the HDRI. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now let's make this like interior of the Pringles can. It's just kind of like a grayish cardboard thing. I can't tell what it really is. I'm going to take the base color. I'm going to bring it down. And just so we can kind of see what's going on here, I'm just going to give it a bit of like random bump mapping. So something like, I don't know, noise or wave or whatever. So this is what it would look like. We're going to turn this into a bump map just so we get a bit of variation going on in here. Connect that to the normal. So now we've created some normal mapping. Let's look at that mixed shader. By the way, you want to make sure this is connected to the height. So you can see it's looking like super weird. We'll fix it. I want to, first of all, I want to use our UV map, which is applied to both the inside and the outside of the wrap. Again, remember that's the first part we worked on. Let's have it go around the UV. Although you could argue there is a seam here, right? Because it is a UV map and it goes around the cylinder. Maybe we use object coordinates instead, which do move with it, so it's not a big deal. Bring down the scale, bring down the detail, and lastly, bring down the strength of this. So it's very subtle, something like 0.1. So this is without, and this is with. Not too much of a difference, but it does actually let you see what's going on here. And I'm going to make this a bit darker. Okay, that is looking pretty good. So far we have 3 materials. We have our main one with the texture that we did the back-facing trick for. We can actually just Control H to do that. We did the back-facing to mix shaders. Let's clean this up a little. So we have that material. We have the metal material for the lips, and then we have this metal shiny just for the bottom. I guess final thing you could technically do is you could, make a Pringles chip. I don't think I'll do that here. Maybe I'll do that on another tutorial. But also, these things do have lids. I don't know if I have mine here. Let me go grab a lid, one sec. There we go. I happen to have 3 Pringles cans on me because I want to do a CG Matter video about them. That's why I have this here. We have this lid that's kind of transparent. It's actually very transparent. And it fits right on top. So why don't we actually make that? Why not? Should be some transmissive BSDF nonsense. It's not glass. I don't know what it is. Let's make it. Shouldn't be too big of a deal. To do it, we could just kind of use some of this geometry. Yeah, why not? It would be faster. So I'm going to take this Pringles can. I'm going to duplicate it. Okay, and you're thinking, why do you duplicate it to make the lid? It's a different thing. Don't worry about it. So we're going to call this the lid. Literally all we're going to keep. So I'm going to take this loop, which is where the can or the lid fits over, so it's the same girth. I'm going to take this, I'm going to invert the selection and delete it. So literally all we have is this strip, and we can actually center the geometry. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for origin to geometry. We literally just have the slip, and then we can model different stuff on it. So for this lid, I'm going to get rid of all these materials. I'm going to make a new material, which I'm going to call the lid. One thing I want to do is I want to scale this thing so it's a bit bigger, not by much, but a bit bigger than the lip because it has to go over it. And let's just see what this looks like. So I'm going to put it on top of the can. You can see it kind of goes a tiny bit past it, and then it curves up and seals. So let's do that. So it has to go a tiny bit past it. So just bring that edge loop down. By the way, let's turn off proportional editing. It's going to go a bit past it. And it's going to go a bit above it, obviously, since it needs to seal it. And then we do F to seal it like that. And by the way, this is obviously a thing that you'd want to bevel and inset and stuff like that. So let's actually go to solid view. I'm going to inset this. I'm just looking at my reference. I'm going to take this loop and extrude it upwards because it does seem to have a bit of that going on. And then the rest of this is just bevels. So take that, that, and that, and we're going to bevel them just slightly. And by the way, if your bevels pass through each other, C to clamp to make sure they don't go too far, and then merge by distance if you have extra geometry, like 60 vertices were just removed there. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to shade smooth this, and it should still have our, yes, it still has our auto smooth. Before we give this thing a material, technically this thing's kind of like a infinitely thin lid, right? It doesn't have any thickness, so let's actually give it some thickness. So I'm going to give it a solidify, and this just thickens it, kind of like extrude along normal style. So just something like that. So light actually has to travel through it. We could just put this lid on and off. Technically there's a bit more detail going on here, but this will be a fine start. Now let's work on the material. So this is just our cap. And for the material, this lid material, we want to make it transmissive so you can actually see through it. But we do need to do a bit of work on this. So typically to make this thing kind of see-through, I think you bring up the transmissiveness and bring down to roughness. And this is going to kind of make it look like glass, so we need to make sure we go film transparent. And then also, let's see, we're really seeing through this. I guess the way around this is you take the alpha and bring it down. That just kind of makes it see-through, but that's not technically what we want. Nor is it supposed to be this rough either. So let me bring up the roughness to what it would actually be like, something like 0.5. IOR should be something closer to 1, so it's kind of like see-through and it's not actually diffracting or refracting light, maybe 1.1. Changes light a little. It's going to be white. Yeah, maybe it's rougher than I think it is, something like this. And we could also bump up the transmissive roughness. In fact, this might be, I'm just going to try a little experiment here. We could keep working with this if it doesn't work. Oh, by the way, I wonder if applying the solidify does anything. I don't know if that, it shouldn't change anything. I was going to say, I do want to see what the translucent BSDF looks like, because it is kind of translucent in a sense. That does seem to be working a bit better. So translucent means light passes through it, but not fully. So it's somewhere in between opaque and transparent. So translucent's anywhere in between. That does kind of work better. Let's see what this looks like when we lift the lid. Yeah, I think this is actually the way to go. And I think, does the color affect how much see-throughness it has? No. So we could take this. We could take a transparent BSDF. So I guess we're making a custom one. Whatever. Sometimes the principled BSDF, I don't know how to use it fully for what I want. So you could just make your own. I'm going to mix this with a transparent BSDF so it has some transparency. Yeah, there you go. Now it's looking good. It has some transparency, some translucency, so you can actually mix between the two. And this is a good blend where if I was to put like an object inside the can, so let me just go to solid view. This is going to be an object inside the can. You can kind of see it because it's kind of transparent, kind of transmissive. And I'm just looking to see how, much we can see through it, and this will affect how much we should move this slider. So something like 0.6 seems to work. And even crazier, you could actually change this depending on viewing angle. So you could use like the Fresnel. Let's see how that would look if we use the Fresnel for this. Might not work, just an experiment. And we might want to reverse these. Yeah, there you go. So the idea of the Fresnel is as we kind of like look at it from this angle, it's very, what's the word? It's very translucent, but then as we look up top, it's very transparent. And you could actually do a like multiplication of this. So I'm gonna do math. I don't know if this is like technically correct about like what it looks like. So this is what it was before, or maybe it's addition that I want. I'm gonna add 0.5. So this is before and then after. Yeah, I think this might be the way to go. So it changes depending on the viewing angle, which I think makes sense. Either way, this is just a very simple material that we could use. So let's put that here, and let's actually seal the lid. I want to see what it looks like when everything's all together. Okay, so we have this. We have our lid. It does look pretty good. In fact, I do want to make the lid a tiny bit bigger, just so it's slightly bigger than the lip. I know we already did it, but I want it to be even slightly bigger than the lip. There we go. That looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. And of course, this is the kind of thing that looks better as we do more samples, or you could turn on denoising for the viewport. Yeah, that looks pretty correct to me. And even the bottom and all this. So let's see what we have so far. We have our lid. That should just have the lid material good. And then the other one's the one with all the material slots. Okay, so let's do a bit of cleanup. File, cleanup, unused data blocks, gets rid of the lights and all this and stuff we don't care about. We could also pack all these images, including the one we made into it. I think last thing I want to do, I just want to do a bit of work on the actual like wrapping part of it that we talked about. So in other words, the wrapping Patreon material, this part of it, before the back facing. I'm seeing that it does have bump mapping, but it's not like, it has nothing to do with the texture. It's kind of like a tree bark. Like there's just some like normal stuff going on. Kind of like more like a candy cane, to be honest. There's the swirl going on, and I want to incorporate that. To do that, let's do a wave texture, or at least we can get something that kind of looks like it. I want it to kind of go diagonally wrapping around it. I don't know if there's an easy way to do that without a bunch of math, but we can see if one of these settings gets us kind of close. Yeah, it's not too bad. Like again, I do want it to spiral, but I don't think anybody will notice. So this is just going to be a tiny bit of detail. I'm going to add in these stripes. I'm going to turn these stripes into bump mapping. So they're actually normal information now. I don't know why that's not updating. Oh, because it's in, there we go. Needs to be in height. I'm going to connect this to the normal. And let's see what this looks like. So right now it should be way too intense, yeah. But you can see we do get our ridges. And to make those less visible, I'm going to bring down the strength. And then also I want more of them. So now it's just this very vague, it makes it look a bit more cardboardy, I guess. And I think I want to make it even, not invert it, I think I want to make it even softer. Just so it's very barely there. So I'm just going to zoom in so you can see. You can see these stripes before, after. Hopefully YouTube compression isn't so brutal that it doesn't keep that. And in fact, I think I'm actually going to use this for both of these. So I'm going to take our normal mapping for this one. Remember, we did do that random noise thing just to kind of distort the interior of this. So I just added a bit of noise. I want to add in a bit of contribution here. So I'm going to do math addition before the bump nodes. So in other words, take both of these. I'm going to add them. So now it's going to be kind of hard to see, but our lines are there as well. And because we said like half the strength of 0.1, I'm just going to take this and divide it by 2, just so it's half the contribution. And I think the bigger this number is, the less visible it is, although it doesn't seem to be doing much. Let's see, color, or is it factor we want? There we go. No, it's because I'm dividing them by each other. Factor, take that. Doesn't seem to be getting very soft. Huh. I don't think there should be any difference between multiplying by 0.5 and dividing by 2. What if we make this super low? Okay, now it's starting to soften. Okay, I think I'm happy with this. So now we have stripes here and on the thing, and these are like super tiny details that nobody cares about. And speaking of tiny details, should I just go crazy with this and like make a bit more stuff going on here? What if I add 0.4? That makes it more see-through? Is that what we have? Yeah, that is what we have going on. I was thinking about adding in just a tiny bit of dust. Oh, and also we can change our Fresnel value, by the way. I didn't mention that. So you could change like how this viewing angle thing's calculated. Also, another way to do this is you could swap this with a layer weight that has both Fresnel and also this facing number, which might even be better for what we're doing. Let's try it. We could always go back. So same idea, it's more transparent as we look through. Yeah, whatever, looks fine. Let's keep it this way. I was thinking about adding in just a tiny bit of like soft dust just to make this thing look more realistic. So let's do it, whatever. Noise, using something like object coordinates. Again, this is only on the lid, and we can actually view it as such. So here's the noise texture on top. This is going to be our dust. And to soften this, I'm just going to use some color ramp. So what I want is I'm just going to mix this with a diffuse BSDF. I'm losing my voice, means we should really wrap up soon. Did I change that? No. I'm just going to mix these two together. Oh, my voice is gone. It's leaving me. I'm just going to mix these together. This is going to be kind of like a yellowish dust so we can see what's going on here. And then the mixing factor is going to be determined by this color ramp, which is determined by the noise. So I think I want to bring this up, or is it the other way around? I want to bring this down. There we go. One of these will make it so that the dust is very, not visible. So there we go. I'm going to bring up the detail on that dust, and I also want to bring up the roughness, just so it's not as apparent. So it's just kind of like this dust laid on top, bigger scale, and then let's change the color to something that's not as distracting. So like a very soft yellow. And we could turn down this handle, I believe, is going to make that invisible. So yeah. Basically, the closer this bottom handle is to white, it's kind of like the transparency of this. So there you go. But again, way too powerful still. So I'm just going to go like that. So this is just the tiny detail that nobody cares about, but now it exists. So I think we've gone overkill enough. I think we've made this Pringle can. You can now like open the lid and throw it away and stuff like that, and the interior looks cool and all this, and the bottom's shiny. And we made our custom texture, which is what matters the most. So I think I'm going to put an end to this monstrosity. How long have we been going for? We've been going for almost an hour-long tutorial. Whew. Anyways, hopefully you enjoyed this thing. You now know how to make a Pringles can. And yeah, I'm going to put the images up on Patreon and stuff like that. And speaking of this, what's this to the right, assuming I do it? It's a list of the names of the patrons. Or no, I didn't even make a joke. Is it a list of electrons in my fingernail? No, it's a list of patrons. Why are they patron? Other than supporting both channels, well, they get access to stuff. They get early access to tutorials, so they can see it earlier than most people, sometimes multiple days early. They get blend files or project files, like in the case of this one. They also get access to what? Exclusive tutorials I don't post on either channel. I do those a couple times a month. Stuff like this. So Patreon exists. There's a link in description. Check it out if you care. If you don't, whatever. Hopefully you learned something, and let me know, for real. Let me know how you like this format. I like it. It's low stress. You get to fully make a project, to get into the details, and it's a bit longer. Whatever. Anyways, hopefully you enjoyed this. It's not a shit show. It's pretty good. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I think I'm done. See ya.